Anyway, give a massive welcome, Ed O'Brien, John Robb. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thanks to our support act. Yeah.
I've always wanted to be a Manchester legend.
You finally done it.
Finally.
Yeah. So I thought that'd be a good point for us to start, actually, because I think there's probably quite a lot of people don't know you have a Manchester connection. I mean, the Ritz, it's a wonderful venue. I've been here about 1 million times, and you actually spent quite a lot of your latter teenage years in here.
Yeah, I was a student here from 87 to 1990 at the university, and I purposefully wanted to come to Manchester. I was a massive music fan, and anything that seemed to come out of Manchester from about 78 onwards sort of was on my radar, and I loved. And of course I became a, Joy Division, New Order, everything on Factory. But then, the Smiths came along in 83, and I was, that's literally the reason I came here. But I was also in the band that I'd formed at school, which is Radiohead. And coming from a city like Oxford, I knew that I wanted to find out about the music scene. I knew that there was all the front stuff about the music and all of that, but there's a whole kind of, as Andy was talking about, an ecosystem. And in Oxford in the mid-80s, there was no ecosystem.
There was a small one, though, wasn't there?
Well, it came
what's that
later.
street called all the venues are? There was a magazine, there was a little infrastructure,
But that came later.
Okay,
so when I left in 86, there was one venue called the Jericho Tavern. And then I came here, and, the International 2, the Ritz, the Hacienda, Band on the Wall, the university. And it was again being in a city. And I remember the first weekend I walked to Salford Uni from Fallowfield to see the Wooden Tops play. And it was total immersion. And I was under the pretense of doing a degree here, but really what I was doing, I started to book bands at the university, at the Hall of Residence, Owens Park. I got involved with, I sort of did roadieing at the university. I fronted a dodgy club at Legends for 2 nights for Robb Ballantyne, who was the events manager who went to work at SJM. It was all very under the, nobody came. And then I sort of just got in there and rolled my sleeves up and tried to figure out, how does a band go from being a band like we were, a school band, to a band that gets signed? And Manchester was kind of like my sandpit. And it was incredible. I mean, I came in 87, and I remember Mars, Pump Up the Volume was #1, Public Enemy, Rebel Without a Pause. And I remember going to Hacienda the first night, and I can't remember the DJ, but hearing The Fall, followed by Public Enemy, it was just like, I'm in heaven.
The whole eclectic thing.
Yeah, the
best record collections, as Tony used to say, which was kind of true, wasn't it?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And because I come from Oxford, and Oxford it's about the university, and it was about Cowley. And there was no black culture in Oxford. That's another thing. So there's a lot of kids who came from London to university here, and they brought, they were all into rare groove and soul and early hip hop. Where I came from, there was no black culture. Of course, Manchester, you got Hume and Moss Side, and so it was kind of, and there was reggae, and it was just okay. It was just, I love this city. I really, it was just the best 3 years. Became a huge Mondays fan, and of course the Roses, and that whole thing exploded. And I was just, it was, and like Andy Burnham said, it was the center of the musical universe.
And as somebody who came from a city in the south, did you feel welcome here? Because I think that's one of the, because I'm not from Manchester, I'm from Blackpool.
Yeah.
And it was always a very welcoming city. And I think that, and as Tony always used to say when I used to meet in the streets, and have fantastic arguments with him about everything, but he used to call it a city of immigrants. And I think that's really important, especially in the current political city climate, that Manchester is a brilliant city for immigrants. Anybody can come here and be part of it. So obviously being white's a little easier, but come from the south, did you feel welcome here?
Yeah, it was interesting because Oxford is very, I mean, the university is pretty eclectic, so you had academics from all over, but really it is essentially white and very kind of English. And I always grew up being very aware of, I mean, anybody with an Irish surname, I was different. And, you know, there was always, in the 70s and 80s, the kind of an anti-Irish thing. Coming to Manchester, it was something like this Irish community. And I remember the first day going to Affleck's Palace. I thought, I'm not going into the university. I want to go to this place called Affleck's Palace. Then going into a chippy, getting chips and gravy, and the woman calling me love. And I'm just like...
The full Northern experience.
Yeah, I was just... it was really welcoming. And yeah, it was great. And what I didn't appreciate was, at the time, I guess, is I was always trying to not be a student. Because coming from Oxford, the students really, there was a lot of kind of anti-student sentiment from the town people, and I thought that same thing would exist. Well, it didn't really exist, and what I didn't realize, actually, if you've got 50,000 students in a city, that energy and that creativity and that kind of disposable income as well, they want to go out, and that plays a part, right, to a vibrant scene.
Completely. I mean, I love it in September when the students come back and you just get that rush of youthful energy.
Yeah.
And I live in Hume, and it's very noisy with the students. I totally love it. It's brilliant. You know, that's what a city should be like: vibrant, youthful, forward-thinking.
Yeah.
Which is very Manchester. Which I guess is what that kind of energy is what you took from the city at the time as well.
Totally. And I think the university, I was I kind of got my shit together the last year, because I did no work for 2 years, and I was doing basically an economics degree, but it was mainly politics. And I suddenly realized there was this government department there, and they were known as the Manchester Mafia. And I think there were people like Peter Mayer, who became he went on to be a professor, and was a leading light in kind of European, the move in Europe in great, and they were very, very forward thinking there. It was a very different kind of, you know, academic experience, I think, than, you know, there were a lot of good universities, obviously, but yeah, I love this city, and it has that kind of, you know, the university made a big thing of it. It was where the computer was invented, right?
Okay, computer.
There you go, full circle.
Still got a blue plaque. Manchester doesn't celebrate its past enough, actually. But,
right.
you know, the world's first computer. Most people don't actually know where that was, but I know where it was.
You know, exactly.
So what did you take back from Manchester to the other guys in Radiohead, musically, culturally, spiritually? What did you take stuff back in there? Was it part of the...
Maracas.
Well, that's a pretty big part. I mean, Bez was an amazing part of the Mondays.
I remember, I'll digress slightly, but I remember, because like everyone here in Manchester, like that whole thing in '89. Like, do you remember, like, people just playing bongos in the street? And I took a pair of, I bought my maracas, and you just go to a gig and play maracas, and I took it down to Oxford, and everyone was like, who's the fucking loony in the corner? What did I take? I understood what we had to do. I understood the kind of management that we needed. I understood all the sort of stuff behind the scenes, which is important. What we had to get our... You see, it was interesting, because when we were signed in the end of '91, we got a lot of interest. So I finished here in 1990, and then Tom had another year at university in Exeter, and then that summer of '91, we were like, right, what we needed to do, what we realized is we needed to build up a local support. Like, I always remember the Mondays and the Roses and the Spiral Carpets. They were playing big venues, and then they'd be playing clubs throughout. They had such a great loyal following, and I knew we had to do that. There was no point us trying to get gigs in London. What we had to do was build up, and thankfully by that stage, there was a local scene happening, and Ride, the band, had sort of, they'd helped foster this scene, and so there was an audience, and there was an infrastructure. There was a venue, there were rehearsal rooms, which there hadn't been before, and there was a local music magazine called Night Shift, Curfew, and they were really important. That was the ecosystem. So what we needed to do was, we aspired to be on the front cover of Curfew, the free music magazine, which came out every month, and to build up a following, so we'd have 150, so that by the time there was some record company interest, should we get it, rather than us go to London and do a kind of a showcase, they'd have to come to Oxford. And it happened very quickly. It happened within 3 months, and that's exactly what happened.
What's always interesting me about you, Ed, is you've had the success in Radiohead. You know, last time I saw you play Manchester was at the cricket ground, and it wasn't playing cricket. There was 50,000 people there, and it was like watching the weirdest little underground band you could possibly imagine. You'd probably should really be getting one play a week on City Music, but somehow in the mainstream.
Yeah.
And it's a brilliant trick that you pulled off there to take that music and actually make it into some kind of weird pop music. And I remember we talked about this before, there's two little things come off this, but we talked about your influences. I mean, Johnny Marr's a big influence, but also John McGough as well.
Yeah.
You know, he came to Manchester as a student and became one of the greatest guitar players of that post-punk period. And that kind of managed to thing where you just take your own route, even if it doesn't work, you're just going to go there anyway.
Yeah.
Was that something you took from the city?
Yeah, and I think musically, I think one of the things about Manchester is, you know, there's always been an attitude, but melody. What I've always thought about Manchester music, there's a melody. It's very musical. Mm-hmm. I've always thought that, and you know, all those bands up to, you know, the Doves and stuff like. There's always and I think it's, I don't know what it is. I've talked to Johnny a bit about it, and it's obviously this is the whole white aspect of the music here. Maybe it's an Irish thing as well. Maybe it's because of the big Irish community here. They bring melody and that thing's important. But definitely it gave, and then because of course we sort of came up at the same time as Britpop. We weren't part of Britpop, but Britpop was all about tunes. It was an attitude, but it was all about tunes. So I think it was, we always had that, but what we were always trying to do was, rather than make a song straight ahead, and it was all probably a bit like Magazine. I mean, Magazine were a huge influence, another obviously, you know, Manchester band, and the Smiths, but sort of again subverted. I mean, the Smiths were the most melodic band. Johnny's guitar playing the songs and the music he wrote was incredible, but it was, you know, juxtaposed with these acerbic and witty lyrics. Morrissey, and so yeah, I think coming to Manchester, I always kind of, in a funny kind of way, I didn't really want to come back to Manchester until I was, you know, I left in 1990. I wanted to come back with my band, and I wanted us to be, it was really important to me that we mattered in a place like Manchester, because there are a lot of, you know, because of the music that I love from here, but also the inherent musicality of the city. I always remember like talking to booking agents when I worked here. They loved booking when I was here. You know, I might book the odd band come up from London. They loved coming here, and they'd often start a tour in Manchester because the audience were, you know, they're up for it like a Glasgow audience are typically, you know.
And is that experience of when you were a student and doing all those different facets of music, you know, you said you're putting nights on, you were roadieing, trying to play music, going back to Oxford to rehearse on a Friday, and all those kind of things, to this day, you seem to be very involved, you know, because a lot of people in your position now, in a band that sold an awful lot of records, you don't have to care anymore, do you? But I know what you do because we're both on the board of the FAC, and I know how much you care about young bands and all the different little problems that affect the music industry, which shouldn't really affect someone in your position, but you're passionate about these, aren't you? Is that from that period and that kind of running through?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know if it's from that period. I think it's, you know, I love seeing young bands and artists, and, you know, I love seeing, for instance, you know, in London where I live now, seeing a lot of the black British artists like Dave and, you know, all the, and Little Sims, and, you know, people who start off in these communities and they go on this journey. I love that. I don't, you know, that's an inherent thing. I think I've always, you know, and coming here, I love that thing of the local to the international. Yeah, I don't know why you're right. Like, there are sometimes times when I think, God, I wish why am I getting involved in this streaming inquiry? Why am I just like, you know, and that was a bit of I didn't really enjoy that, but I feel like it's a bit like if you've had some success, and I feel like, so my analogy is a bit like school. So I remember when I arrived at school in the third year, 13 years old, and the boys, when they're 18, they're like men, aren't they, when you're that age? And you're like, fucking hell. And they were nasty, you know, they were really nasty. I remember thinking, Like, and I remember saying to one, I was like really upset and I was being bullied by a 17-8. I said, why are you fucking doing this to me? And he said, because it was done to me. And I just thought that was really shit. So when I got to 17 or 18, I was like, no, this has got to change. So, and I feel passionately about the music industry, because the music industry, it was so nice hearing Andy Burnham talk, wasn't it? Somebody who's got who's a political person in power, who cares and understands about this industry that we're all part of. We're world, you know, we are really good at it globally. We're really, really good at it. But we are I think we operate at like 40% of our capability, because there's such an imbalance in this industry. And at the heart of it, it's this old school model, and it generates lots and lots of money. And at the heart of it, there's this kind of, it's very opaque. There's no clarity, like where the collection agencies, where the money, how streaming works. It's really, it's this digital model built on this old model. And this needs to be sorted out. And I really believe passionately in it, because, you know, I've done fine, but I've done great. I feel like I've won the golden ticket. But I'm the exception to the rule. Most people don't have that. Look at Tom Gray from Gomez. Why is he, you know, why has he been so impassioned about his Broken Record campaign? Because he's a living, breathing example of a band who are a great band, but make no money from, you know, people playing their music now. So we need to sort this out, and that's my big passion about moving forward as an industry and sorting this out and what we also had, all this kind of what I call this opaqueness, this lack of transparency and where money flows. It creates huge mistrust. Artists mistrustful of record companies, managers, agents. There's this whole area. If we clear it up so it's very clear, then you get rid of this mistrust. And this mistrust, I also think, takes up so much energy, negative energy. That energy should be used in creativity, involve getting young people making music. So I have a real passion about that, yeah, and you know, that's sort of runs concurrently with trying to be an artist, a musician myself.
I mean, it's interesting to talk about that. So we talk about in the context of the streaming debate, and on the FAC, we seem to endlessly talk about it all the time. A lot of brilliant people involved in it, yeah. And Tom Gray, of course, and the whole campaign outside that. But it's frustrating, isn't it? Because no one wants to change it. Well, no. We want to change it. Yeah. Of course, we don't hold the cards. I mean, when you go in there, I mean, what changes would you, if you can make changes now, today, what changes would you make?
Wow. Well, that's the question that we need, what the changes. I think what we need to do is all the deals that have been done, that are kind of, there are lots of deals that the majors and stuff did with the streaming companies and tech companies are going on. They all need to be transparent. We need to be transparent with where the money is. And we need to start looking at this imbalance and the way that artists are the way that artists and how they sell their rights. I think that, for me, that is the heart of it. There's no, you know, the music industry should be, and when it works great, like when we've worked Radiohead or as an artist, it's a proper partnership. But the deals and stuff are not genuine partnerships for artists. And that's where we have to start. And it's interesting because I think there's a shift happening. You know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, the execs up high, and there's still one or two of them who are still there, they're all shit kickers from the 70s and 80s, and it's that whole divide and rule. And it's kind of very similar to the British class system. You know, something's imposed on you. This is how it's going to be. There's new generations coming through who understand that it's basically really unfair. And the fact that, you know, an artist, I had the pleasure of hearing the MD of a very major label the other day saying to me, I think it's wrong that an artist signs away their copyright, their songs for life. You know, and he made the analogy that we've all been saying is like, when you buy a house, you borrow that money, You pay it off and you pay more because they've lent you the money and we accept that. But at the end of it, they don't. The building society or the bank doesn't hold on to the. You get it, and there's a spiritual aspect to it. The spiritual ownership. This person mentioned Paul McCartney and said it broke their heart that Paul McCartney, Northern Songs, which him and John Lennon wrote, their songs. And the story that he had, that it was told by Michael, that Michael Jackson bought it. It's wrong. And there's something fundamentally wrong about that. So I think that's where my passion is. I see a huge injustice in the system. I don't want it to be a beef against major record labels, because you can have a great partnership. And Radiohead have benefited in the early days from being with EMI. However, we had great friends that business affairs is a whole different. That's the dark arts. So the front end, who you're dealing with, the A&R marketing, those people are great. But it was always the business side that you sort of got. That's where the mistrust. So I think we need to sort that out, and we need to genuinely. And this is the thing. I think the industry needs to get together, and how we do it, I'm trying to figure out, because I'm not sure doing it by committees and interest groups, you actually get any change. I think it's a bit like a peace treaty, if you like. You have to get characters. Mm-hmm. You have to talk to people, and you have to get to know them. And we have to figure out how we're going to create a fair industry, because it's so unfair.
But is there a willpower from the industry itself, from the upper echelons, to actually make that change? Because at the moment, the system's actually in their favour, isn't it?
No, because the system is all built on copyright, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, bigger view here, I think there's a shift in consciousness happening. And I think it's no coincidence in the last 7-8 years that the Me Too campaign, Black Lives Matter, there's something shifting. There's something in the ether, and I think I certainly can feel, and a lot of people I know, musician stuff can feel that. And I think one of the, if you like, the overriding theme of maybe this era that we'll look back on is all those dark corners that we've shoved stuff in, that we kind of. The injustices are all being revealed and brought to light. And I think the way that we've treated artists, musicians and stuff, that's changing. And I also think my experience of meeting now younger executives, they're a different breed. They wanna be loved by the artists. They wanna have partnerships. The problem is the business model has changed. But as I said, I don't know if I said, so we're living in this era where we've got 3 major record companies. Elon Musk could go and buy Universal Records like that, and he could turn around and be the savior of all artists, and he could say, actually, you know what? I'm going to free up all these artists. We're going to do this properly. After 20, 25 years, we're going to let all our artists on our labels get their copyrights back. We want to be able to the rights to exploit those catalogs. That will be part of the thing for a certain given. But I know that might sound a bit mad, but it would take one person like that, and suddenly that record label, that major record label or whatever, the independents. I want to say, because I know this independent, they're always more enlightened, and maybe actually what's happening in the independent sector will force the majors to actually rethink their business model. But it needs, the shareholder or the one person who owns it, whether it's the guy who owns Warner's, to suddenly, have a Damascene conversion, be like, I'm going to be this savior.
And are you optimistic that this can happen, or is it feel like you're just running into a brick wall all the time?
I don't know. It's a bit of both, to be honest, isn't it? It's a bit like sometimes you think that I get optimistic when you have the conversations. I think there's an appetite there for people to fully engage, and I really think there's a will there, because I think, people realize that the system is broken, and Tom Gray's brilliant campaign, Broken Records, has really brought that to the fore. And obviously what we've gone through the last 18 months with the lack of touring, so people are reliant on streaming income or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I sometimes I feel there is grounds for optimism, and other days I think, fuck it, why do I bother, sort of thing. But I think that's a very human thing. I think that's right, what we're...
But that's what's interesting, because you do bother.
Yeah, but I don't always, no. No, yeah, well, I think we're lucky in the FAC that there are people like yourself and Sandy Shaw and Lucy Pullin and Fran Healy and people, and David Martin, who runs it, CV. So it's like anything. Sometimes you need to come along, don't worry about it or whatever. But yeah, I do care. Of course I do. Why wouldn't you?
I mean, music itself has changed a lot from when you started, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, when I was growing up in the early days of music, and this is something that actually affected you because you suffered from depression, haven't you?
Yeah.
And when I was growing up in the 70s in Blackpool, you wouldn't talk about that kind of thing.
No.
If you did, people would just laugh at you.
Yeah.
Whereas now people could talk about it openly, which is brilliant, and there's a victory there, isn't there? And also at the time, because the band was really successful, and you were suffering depression, and that was a dichotomy most people probably couldn't understand.
Yeah.
Well, now that's become an issue, and just before the pandemic, it was a very key issue, and I remember a lot of people talking about it. And is that something that's really concerned you as well, on this idea that there has to be a safety net for musicians?
Yeah, and I think it's brilliant, like you said. I think nowadays there's an open discussion about it, and I didn't even know. I mean, I was depressed as a kid, but I didn't realize that I was depressed, And I think that it's great that it's changed, and there's just I think that's where the optimism comes, actually, John. I think that's where the optimism comes. I think when I see my kids' generation, it's very different. It's very, very different, and I can't speak for all kids, obviously, but I see, kids in a sort of similar circumstance, or they've got a lot more privilege because, but than we had. But they're very caring. They're really supporting, like in a way that we weren't. I mean, don't know what it was like for you, but it was, even in the band, it was like a bit like the law of the jungle, and there was no sort of. I mean, in the band, when I was suffering from, the height of, when we were at our peak, if you like, and suffering from depression, I never admitted it. There was no way I was going to.
See, that would surprise me, because I don't know, this is quite naive, but I thought Radiohead would be the kind of people you could have done that with, as opposed to a lot of the people I would know up here. Yeah, you could do, but there was because we were formed essentially in the school playground, there was that whole thing about saving face. Yeah. So I could have, but I didn't want to be perceived as being vulnerable. So I'm sure it would be met, but I was just like, no. Well, also, I prided myself on being kind of the rock in the band. I would kind of be the one that if someone else was having a bad time, I would make sure that, I'd look out for them, or, but so I was just, I can't go down, so it was, it was save face, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because often it is the one who is the rock and is the one who has the most problems themselves, isn't it? Because it's kind of adding everyone else's pressures to your pressure, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's always like the Joker as well. I always, Neil Finn of Crowded House is a really good, is a good friend, and he's a good friend of Johnny Marr's, where we've all played together. And Paul Hester was a drummer in Crowded House. He was the real Joker. He committed suicide. And you can see that's right, it's that need to, I think the comedian thing is that need to be loved, there's a hole there, right? And I agree, it is often the one who's the rock who has problems. It's why I think as well, when people study psychotherapy, psychotherapists, trainee psychotherapists, have to have a lot of therapy themselves. There's obviously that kind of, and I've known quite a few friends who I didn't think that they would go into psychotherapy because I thought they would need it more than would be able to help. But of course, that's part of it, you know.
I mean, for a long time, it was an industry where very sensitive people, which a lot of artists are, were going into a very insensitive industry. Weren't they? You know, it's probably not the right place, but now there is an infrastructure. Do you feel it's better?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting because I signed with my solo deal. I ended up signing with Capitol, which is a whole other story, which is a major label, and I was put out through Polydor here in the UK. And my marketing manager, I said she'd been working for Polydor for 6 months, and I said, you know, I've heard some, you know, not great things about working at Universal, let's put it that way. And I said, how is it? She said, it's great. She said, they're really big on mental health. And I think that's been extended to artists as well. And you're right, I think it's such an interesting industry because one of the key things are, you know, artists tend to be very sensitive. And, you know, you have to develop a thick skin, you had to before. And sometimes that didn't work. You know, look at Brian Wilson and, you know, and these thick skins that people had to develop in order to move forward. And of course, some of them didn't. And some of them couldn't handle it because it was, you know, particularly if you go to somewhere like America, you go on tour in America and and it still is, it's a big place. And it was, I mean, I don't know what it's like to tour now because I'm being, or break America, but back in the 90s, it was like these quite challenging characters that you go around with who were like, you know, ball breakers, and it was like, come on, what are you fucking blimey bastards? You know, it was all very kind of like grab you by the balls kind of thing. So yeah, it wasn't sensitivity wasn't there. You had to be very robust, and sometimes, as you know, people aren't.
No, and well, you talk about America, it's 16-hour drives don't help either.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you look at the music industry as it is now, there's a lot of people running venues here today and stuff. I mean, obviously in your position, you play bigger venues, but because you're concerned about the way music works, grassroots, etc. And you look at the smaller venues, and do you worry about that? As, the future of them, and
of course.
And do you feel there's something you could personally do? Not that I'm asking you personally to sort it all out, but I mean, you keep an eye on it and.
Yeah, I mean, it's been different since I moved to London. I moved to London 20 years ago. In Oxford, we very directly, I mean, we helped, there was a venue called, well, it's now the Academy. I think, is it an O2 thing as well? It used to be called, it was called the Venue, and then it became the Zodiac. And it was a 350 capacity venue. And us and Ride and Supergrass all invested in it. He needed Nick Morbath, the guy who took it over. He wanted to take over, and he's had this vision. So we all invested in it and put money into it because we knew that if you're going to have a vibrant music scene, you have to have clubs of all levels. So in Oxford, it was the Jericho Tavern, which was 100, 150. And even below that, there's the Wheat Sheaf, which was 50. And it's an ecosystem, isn't it? And that's where you learn your trade as a band and as an artist. I mean, obviously it's changed now. There's a certain, you know, I used to think I had quite a good understanding of the way that people progressed, and now it's kind of like the Wild West, which in one way is great. But there is certainly a need for musicians to hone their craft, and one of the ways you do it, a big part of that is live. So, you know, you have to, we as Radiohead, 1992, we signed at the end of 91. We just played in the UK, and we played 150 gigs, and we opened up for everyone. So we played in the Boardwalk, we played in the Venue here, we played the Top Room at the university, and all over the UK, and places like, you know, the Philadelphia, like Paul Jackson. I remember him, great guy.
Oh yeah, great venue.
Great venue. Yeah. And yeah, they are the lifeblood. And I thought it was really interesting what Andy said about like a tariff. That we need to do that, and we need to look after these venues, these small venues. And you know, we're in the O2 Ritz, and not to put O2 down, but it used to be the Ritz. And one of the great things was each venue wasn't mass owned. It had a promoter, and it had a character, and that's what I loved. You know, it was almost like going to someone's hall or living room or, you know, venue. There was a character. There was and sometimes they were good. Do you remember the Astoria? Did you obviously played there?
Yeah, played there, seen loads of gigs there.
And I love the Astoria as a venue, but absolute nightmare backstage. That crew. That was.
Yeah.
Do you remember? They were.
Yeah, it did kick off.
It would always kick off, and they chuck your gear down a flight. So you take the rough and the smooth, but there was character, and there was soul. There was soul in these venues, and I think that's so important.
Well, it's a beautiful old theatre like this is. You know, I mean, if it takes the O2 to keep these places open, then so be it.
So be it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least it's still here, and we still have the Ritz.
Yeah,
with
it's
its
amazing.
sprung dance floor.
Yeah.
But we don't have the Astoria, which is a shame.
Yeah.
So when Andy was talking, there were so many great ideas there, and I love to see those actually happen. I mean, and you're kind of watching it as well, what Andy's saying, and did you feel, again, as somebody who's kind of committed to the way music works, is there a role for you to play in that as well? You know,
Yeah, I mean, maybe when I'm a bit older. I mean,
we are a bit older, and
know,
I'm even a bit older than that.
I know, but I'm trying to. It's for me at the moment. This is kind of the last thing that I want to. It's a balance to me with the music, and I'm not very good at spinning lots of plates. So I feel like the last year or so, I've been sort of quite involved in the streaming thing. I'm going back to the woods for a bit because I want to make music, and that well is empty at the moment. So I need to immerse myself in that. So it's a really, really hard thing to do, as you know, as a musician. It's kind of that balance between your artistic side, which for me, I need to be. I sort of not have lots of noise, lots of stuff going on, and more in my heart and less in my head. And so that's where kind of like the last 3 or 4 weeks I've just started the journey of trying to figure out where I'm going musically, and that's where I'm going to retreat to. So when I say when I get older, it'll probably be exactly the same. It's like I dig down into the ground and immerse myself in that music, and then pop up and do my thing. But yeah. Which
is fair enough, because actually that's what you really are, is actually an artist. And I remember when we first discussed doing this, and you would talk about what you were doing, and it's quite intriguing actually. You said you're trying to make some new sounds on the guitar, which I thought that's quite interesting. So how far have you got into that? Have you actually?
Yeah.
I mean, how many? Is it possible to actually make a new sound?
Well, I guess it's not. I went to see this. It's about finding something. It's about finding something that you're excited about. I went to this exhibition yesterday at the Tate Britain by this artist called Paul Arrigo. Brilliant exhibition. And it was really interesting because when I go and see an artist like that, and she's 85, and she's born in Portugal, and she came to Britain and studied in the Slade in the 50s. So there's a lot of artwork from her summer prize at the Slade from mid-1950s right up to 10 years ago. She still works. And the thing that I get from it is again the arc, that creative arc, and her style changes. And I think what you're trying to do is, it might not be a new sound. And like her I was thinking about this because stylistically it changes. And I guess in my head I'm trying to reinvent the wheel, and I need to think of it differently because it's not. And I'll never reinvent the wheel, but I guess it's the palette that you choose, the colors that you're choosing from, and a lot of it's intangible because it's not something you're mentally. I can't go like, I want to make. Right, it's got to be distortion. I've got to do that because if I plug it in and I play a distorted guitar, or start riffing on something. If I feel it, great. But if I don't feel it, it's just like, well, I'm not going to persevere. So it is a bit like fishing, and you put out the line and you apply yourself, and you just have to. It's like following this kind of slight thread. It's that feels all right, and that's what it is for me. And I haven't quite found it. I know it sounds I'm being very vague here, but it is very vague. And I haven't found, you know, that seam that I'm gonna mine.
So it's less about creating a startling sound and more a sound that just connects to you. It could be a sound you've even used before, but it still makes you feel great when you hear it, therefore it's valid.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I haven't done that thing, because I know people go full circle and they reconnect with stuff that they might. I haven't done that. I haven't kind of gone like, oh, there's a sound like, you know, for instance, take OK Computer, that I'm into that. That, you know, if we were to play that music now, those same songs, hypothetically, having done those same songs 25 years ago, I wouldn't be connected with it. It would just be like, well, I've done that. Or it doesn't excite me. And I don't know. I think, you know, like music, I love this thing, music and magic, five letters, only two different. There's a magic to it, isn't there? And that's why we're all doing this thing, because what music can do and what can do for all of us and how it helps us, but also in the creation, there's a whole, like, I think, you know, I'm going to say this because I think music is basically sort of like creation is a bit like, for me anyway, and I know a lot of people say this, but it's like sort of channeling. It's like when it comes through you and it's right, it doesn't, there's no effort. There is an editorial component that goes on, and that can go on down the line, but my job as a musician is to try and be the best channel for the source, for whatever that comes down. And I know that sounds might sound like a bit like wee-woo, but to me that's the truth.
That's how it should sound.
Yeah.
You know, it should be something that's intangible and hard to grasp. You know, we're not talking about doing accounts here. We're talking about something that is...
And I think that's what Radiohead has always been about. I think, you know, we haven't spoken about it, but I think the reason we've connected with people, and the reason, like, you know, maybe we're not like a straight ahead band, like you said, it's kind of weird that we'll be playing the Emirates, but I think it's like we're in that tradition of there's a twist to it, but it touches the soul. You know, I've always thought that whatever we are, you know, Radiohead, what we're doing, we're a soul band, and I don't mean a soul band as in genre, but it comes from the soul, and that's the place that's where I am as a musician.
Yeah, I think it's amazing you took that many people on that trip with you. You know, instead of like losing. I mean, obviously some records will do better than others, but it's not like you put a record out and everyone just goes. And it's quite funny because every time you put the record out, people go, "Oh, they've changed. I'm not sure." And a week later, I love it. Yeah, you've had the people actually went with you.
Yeah. Well, Bowie was the great. He was I mean, all our favourite musicians have sort of done that. That thing where they take you on a journey. And I always thought that as a music fan, and we always talked about it, what's the best thing that you can do as a band is that you build up the trust, or as a musician, of your audience, and they trust you to take them on a journey that you on your first listen, you're scratching your head and going, you really lost us on this one. And I know that when we made, after OK Computer, for instance, we made Kid A, which is a very different record. And I know we lost people along the way, but you should never be scared of that. You do it, and but those people who stay are rewarded in a way, because it's a bit like being a curator, if you like. It's like, we're into this and we're going to go here. So yeah, it's a really important thing to be an artist where you have that kind of relationship with your audience, where they trust you, is everything.
It's interesting because your role in the band is a person who plays to that palette in a way, isn't it? I mean, I suppose if you put it in historical context, maybe a bit like Brian Jones in the Stones. They would turn up the song and he put this little layer of magic over the top of it, either a mellotron or a flute, and it just suddenly becomes a wow thing. And in a way, is that what you're doing with pedals?
Yeah, it's a bit different on my own, because in Radiohead I'm like, you know, I'm kind of, well, Tom is the principal songwriter, and he might have worked on stuff with Johnny. So it was just like when we came into rehearsal, it was just like 2 guitar parts worked out, and I'm like, okay, where do I fit in here? Okay, and I'm kind of going, but it was great in a way, because it taught me, like you said, framing a song, or you know, On my own, it's very different because I'm starting with something. But what's great is where I can start from is from the place, the sounds that I bring to Radiohead or that kind of thing. And that can take the song in a different way.
Oh, that's interesting. You actually do back to front.
Yeah.
You start this weird sound and make it into a song.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Wow.
That's kind of, that's kind of what I like to do. And I think that for me, that's the hard part, is the inroad. Because I can pick up an acoustic guitar and I can, play something in a riff, but I'm like, I'm not feeling it. It needs an emotion. It needs a feeling. It needs whatever that sound is. It's communicating something. And
so even beyond the melody, and the songs are melodic on the solo album, which is actually quite interesting, but it's actually the sound that creates the emotion for you. So if you make like a little guitar, it goes, that would be an emotional
If it's
thing,
done, it's great. I had this conversation with Johnny Marr about 3 weeks ago, and I did a live Instagram with him, and it was great because Johnny and I have been friends for 20 years, and he's like an older brother to me. He's been amazing. And I've never been a fanboy with him. I was fucking #1 Smiths fan. I mean, but because, that's not been part of our friendship. He's known that, but I did on this live Instagram thing, I was able to be fanboy. I was just like licensed. And we were talking about a track on Strange Ways called Unhappy Birthday. I know every note of it, obviously. And he was telling me about the bends on the guitars, and I was like, they are so emotional. And he was like, no, they were I was trying to, and I mean, music is so amazing how you can transfer a feeling there to there, right? I mean, you know that, better than...
It is amazing.
It's amazing, and that power of, whether it's anger, love, lust, sex, spirit, beauty. You can. It's incredible.
It's so powerful and it's so intangible, and it is difficult. I mean, you're doing a great job of it, but it's quite hard to describe. As well. You can't.
It's like it is. Yeah. It's like how do you describe it? You can't. It's a feeling, and not everybody will get that. I mean, that's the beauty about music. We're not all into the same things, are we? There's lots of music that I scratch my head at and like, why is it massive?
So actually, before we get a couple of questions off the floor, when you interviewed Paul McCartney, what did you learn from him? I mean, he's actually probably one of the most underrated musicians of all time, isn't he?
He is, like, I always say this, if Paul McCartney just played bass in the Beatles, didn't sing, he'd be one of the greatest bass players. People would talk about him like James Jamerson of the Funk Brothers of the Motown house band in the 60s. He is an amazing musician, and we all grew up with the Beatles, right? And I grew up in a very strong, opinionated father who loved music and had opinions about the Beatles. And what I learned about Paul McCartney is what an incredible human being he is. I think he's an amazing, he just loves connecting with people. He's got this thing. He's an incredible musician, one of the greatest ever songwriters. But as a soul, as a human being, he's incredible. And you get this warmth from him. I'd met him a couple of times before. One time I was really, really stoned and I was a bit freaked out because it was flipping Paul McCartney. But he knew I was, and he gave me a massive bear hug, never having met me. And he's just a really amazing human being. And I contributed to this album that, these artists had done this. People like Queens of Stone Age and Beck and myself had reinterpreted or remixed this last album he did. And he phoned me up to thank me. Rather than he could have written an email, he phoned me up on a Saturday evening and we chatted about the bluebells in spring and our love of the British countryside. He's a total mensch. He's just a beautiful, brilliant human being. And I wanted to tell him that. I said that to him on the Instagram. I said to him, you know why all these, I said, the lineup of the artists is pretty amazing. He said, I know. He said, I'm really surprised. I said, don't be surprised. He said, what? I said, because we all fucking love you. You know, as a musician, as a person, he's incredible.
It is great he's actually finally got this respect.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he sold millions of records and people love the
Yeah.
records, but off the fellow musicians, because it did seem a long time, obviously John Lennon was super talented as well,
Yeah.
but people did have that thing that John Lennon
We
was
grew up
cool
with that
on.
narrative, wasn't it? Lennon's
Yeah.
cool, McCartney does all the nice songs. But you realise that was just a narrative. They were different characters, you know, and they were the yin and yang, and they were key together, and key, you know, the whole Beatles, the four of them were key. But yeah, and, you know, Yesterday, Blackbird, you know, all the rock, Helter Skelter, you know, he did full-on rock stuff. I mean, incredible songs.
Yeah, he had an inquisitive mind, I think. He
Yeah.
was always interested in what was going on, actually. I think that's, and I have to throw that back at you. I mean,
Yeah.
do you listen to a lot of diverse music and you're interested in what's going on out there?
Yeah, I try to. I go through periods when I don't. I've found it really hard listening to music during lockdown. I sort of closed down musically, but I love. I try to listen to. You know, there's so much music out there. So, you know, I do my best. But yeah, I'm inquisitive, and I think that's the thing about curious. And I think the thing is that I share which I know that he has, is this love of people. He's curious about people. He's interested in people. Like I love talking to people. I love people's stories because most of them are inspiring. Everybody's got a story to tell. And I think McCartney coming from Liverpool, and probably like Manchester, that's the same thing. You know, and actually Philip was funny. Philip from our band, I spoke to him having spoken to McCartney. He had a similar experience with Ringo Starr. Ringo Starr was asked who's his favourite drummer that he'd like to interview him, and he said it's Philip Selway from Radiohead. So Philip was flown out to New York, and he had an amazing time with Ringo and got to play with a little help from my friends and all this stuff. And I was chatting with Philip on the phone, and I said, Macca was amazing. He said, and Philip's family, his mum comes from Liverpool, and Philip's wife's family from Liverpool. He said, Ed, the thing what you got to understand is that Macca and Ringo are just like my uncles. They're all just having, you know, they're just good people who want to have a laugh and a chat and play some music and just get on.
But they're pretty good at it. Yeah,
Yeah, particularly good at it.
So a couple of questions from the floor. Anybody got a question?
How did I find the transformation? It's obviously very different. I mean, it was brilliant working with Flood. Flood was kind of like my favorite producer. And what's funny was that he became a mate, first of all. I got to know him through our kids because they were at the same school. And so I took my music to him because I thought he'd be a good sounding board when I had these demos. And you need feedback, and I didn't have any feedback. When you're in a band, there's feedback. You're like, you know, Tom will play us songs, or we go like, you say, oh, this thing, and you go, that's fucking great. You go, really? What, yeah, no. And that's a great strength about a band and about collaboration, is you get feedback, and it becomes like this, you know, this melting pot for ideas, and you riff off. When you're on your own, it's very different. So the experience with Flood was brilliant. It's funny because, you know, it was mainly, I mean, I got musicians in to play, but it was mainly in the studio, me, Flood, the engineer, and sometimes Catherine Marks. She started, a producer who started off on the project. And I was just, you know, I had to play everything, I had to sing, I had to write lyrics, and you realize actually a band is a great place because, you know, if you're a singer, you can work on your lyrics while the guitarist is working on something, or, you know, my role in Radiohead would be often like, you know, if stuff's going on in the control room, I'd be like, you know, maybe Johnny's doing some overdubs or Philip's putting down a drum track or something. I'd be like, oh, I can go where I can go off to a room and sort of work on some sounds and some riffs and stuff that I hear to the music for 4 or 5 hours. So you come back with this idea, you go, what do you think of this? And you're always a band. There's kind of, and I think this is one of the strengths about Radiohead, is that everybody has a creative input. So ideas are being brought forth, and sometimes it slows down, obviously. But it is a completely different experience. It was a brilliant experience, and I've learned from. But it was quite a tough one doing it on your own, because I didn't have time, for instance, to put the time into creating the kind of maybe some of the sonics guitar-wise that I would have in Radiohead, because I was singing. You know, I felt like I couldn't go deep on that. So what's interesting for me on this next bunch of materials, I've set up a studio whereby I can start stuff myself that will be part of the finished result, but I can go deep on the sounds thing and find these sounds, and they're kind of like the foundation, the bedrock to whatever comes out next.
I mean, if you did, maybe you are going to make another record. I hope you do.
I am.
Solo records. Is it going to be a different process?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I connected. You know the producer Paul Epworth?
Mm.
So Paul it was funny, one of these kind of freak things. We have a mutual friend who's this inventor called Anthony Dickens, and he's invented this crazy guitar called the circle guitar. It's bonkers and it's brilliant. And anyway, and it's actually going to be mass produced. And Paul and I were like raving about it. And Paul was like to Anthony, why don't we spend a couple of days in the studio? And I obviously knew Paul Epworth because everyone, you know, he's this huge producer. Adele and Florence and, you know, the Block Party, loads of stuff. And I thought it'd be fun because he's got an amazing studio in London, the Church. And it was like one of those things at the end of the 2 days, and I was just like, I really would love to work with this guy. Because, you know, when you work with a big producer, they're too busy for the likes of me, you know. I'm not of the moment, you know. And he had the same thing. So we've started tentatively working, you know, we had a few days about a month ago, and it was brilliant. He came to Wales, to the studio, and so we're just gonna see how it goes. And it's really nice. And what's great is he's a proper musician and a collaborator, and he's a songwriter as well. So this process is different because it's starting off in a different place. He can play keyboards and stuff. So there's a bit more bouncing off of musical ideas.
That's good, isn't it? It's good to work with different people to see where it takes your creativity, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's like where I am musically, and I don't know what it's like for you or all of you out there, but the pandemic has had a massive effect on me and music. Like, I remember, I'm a bit more tolerant now, but I remember 2 months into the pandemic, and I would always have sort of 6 music on in the background, or like, you know, breakfast, or, you know, putting the kids' breakfast together or whatever, and, you know, lunchtime or having a cup of tea was there. It was always there, and I like that's kind of, you know, I like the spread of it. And I'd hear stuff, and I was just like, you know what? I loved that once. I never need to hear that again. And it's really changed me musically in a funny kind of way. Like, it's put a full stop, or drawn a line on lots of stuff that was really important for me growing up, but I don't need to hear it again. So I'm interested, I guess in a funny kind of way, I'm sort of more interested in a way of a bit more where jazz meets, and it's not jazz, but it's a kind of, you know, Miles Davis in a silent way, classic. That kind of place meets, I don't know, this is what I'm trying to find.
More space in a way.
More space, more kind of slightly less form to it, a bit more, something a bit less still melodic. Melody is really important, and rhythm is important, but maybe something that's less fully formed. I don't know. I'm telling you right at the beginning of what I'm feeling right now.
It sounds fascinating, though. So time for one more question. Anybody got a question?
It was a total laugh. It was so, I can't tell you how brilliant it was. It was proposed by our managers. We got this album, and there was a whole debate of what is music worth, because file sharing was rife. CDs were being sold at 18 quid a pop, which is far too much. And it was just like, it was turning it back about, well, what do you think it's worth? And it was so liberating. I can't tell you to go, to hand it over and to go, pay what you want. It was the gesture of it, and it was really interesting because at the end of that whole album, recording the album, it'd been really hard. And as a band, it completely energetically and emotionally reinvigorated. And the fact that it got up big bands' noses was fucking brilliant. And I remember, you know, I grew up, you know, and loved U2 and stuff like that. And they loved it, but their manager at the time, Paul McGuinness, hated it. And he, you know, I remember him saying it was irresponsible, and we weren't saying this is a model for now or for the future. This is like, we're a band, we're out of contract, we've seen our EMI contract out, we're going to have some fun now. And it was done in the right way. The gesture was not two fingers up at the industry, although some perceive it as it was, and that's a fun part of it as well, the slight kind of, you know, but it was really, it came from a good place. It's like, well, what do you think it's worth? And it was amazing how some people saw it as a threat. It was just brilliant. It was and it was a once in a moment. We could never do it. It was a pivotal time in the music where we were with file sharing and pre-streaming, and the debate was going on about what's worth. It was just brilliant. It was such fun.
Okay, well, I think we're running out of time. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks to Ed O'Brien.
John Robb. Yeah. Thanks, John.